Hi everyone. This is our panel. It's called Fundraising While Female, and we have so many people up on stage. We're going to have an active dialogue today. So I'm just very quickly going to introduce everyone. I'm not going to get into details about what their companies do because they themselves can do that. So I have Jennifer Carolan over here. She is co-founder, general partner of Reach Capital. I have Xiaohua Michelle Ching, co-founder CEO of Literator. I have Mariana Costa, co-founder CEO of Laboratoria. I have Masood, co-founder CEO of Tara. I have Eileen Murphy, co-founder CEO of ThinkCERCA. I have Sara Nadel, founder CEO of StellarEmploy, and I have Maia Sharpley. She is a partner for all of 2 weeks at Learn Capital. And so, let's just dive right into it here. Women-led businesses in ed tech, and we actually we have one HR tech or talent tech person here also, just to participate in the whole dialogue of the education to talent spectrum. So women in ed tech are actually, the percentages are higher than in most tech spaces. 17% in most tech, 30% in ed tech, which is great. And there's no surprise there because education has long been dominated by women. So I want to ask all of you, why did you go into this space? Share your stories. And anybody can start, but Jennifer, maybe you can.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I came into the investing from an unconventional path. So I was a classroom teacher, and I taught for 7 years in traditional classroom in Chicago. And it was there that I became very frustrated with just really poor software, poor technology, that I had to do a really difficult job. So I basically decided that I went looking for technology tools and software. There was nothing that I thought was on par with consumer tech. So moved out to Silicon Valley and went to grad school, and then started going into, got into ed tech investing. Worked at New Schools Venture Fund for almost 10 years. And it was there that I became really inspired that I wanted to be able to back entrepreneurs, founders that were building technology for schools and for teachers. So it was really born out of necessity that I felt like there was not enough funders and not enough educators, I guess, that were thinking about what teachers needed.
Sounds like your story.
Yeah, very similar. There's a lot of echoes there. Is my mic on? Can you guys hear me okay? So my name is Xiaohua Michelle Ching, and yeah, I started in the classroom as well, but I found myself in the classroom because I was really interested in how and what context I needed to make big fundamental changes in education. I'd always gone to schools that were characterized by neglect, that were struggling, and so I knew that was the population I also wanted to serve and where I wanted to have an impact. I thought I would do it through policy, but in a very similar way, I realized the problems were very practical. I was also in the Bay Area. I was watching other people operate in their industries with all of these tools that informed the way that they did work better. And I felt like my space was desperately lacking in that. And I also knew that I had some agency in deciding where and how I would have this impact. And Silicon Valley and the tech space became a very clear parallel to me. To politics. I thought, here's a space that is mostly white and male, that is not necessarily full of women voices, women of color voices who are advocating for, the most vulnerable populations. So felt like as good of an entree as any to the space.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mariana. In my case, it was, I think, really by luck, and those things in life that happen. So I started a web development company in Lima, that's where I'm from, back in 2013, 2014, and realized that it was really hard to build our own team of software developers. There just wasn't enough talent out there. Once we started building that team with a lot of effort, it became that typically all-male team. We had like 15 developers and not a single woman. So I just got frustrated with that and really decided that there was such an opportunity to prepare more women to join the tech sector. And also something else that I realized is that in the tech space, in Latin America, where you usually, to get a good job, you really need a good degree from a good school. I was seeing in the world of software development many more alternatives. Many of our best developers didn't have a degree from a good school. And I thought, wow, this is like a loophole in the system, really a unique opportunity to get people who haven't had access to that type of good quality education because of economic limitation, and prepare them to become world-class junior developers and join the sector, not only transform their lives, but also change the industry.
That's awesome. I'm Iba. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tara AI. And so I primarily come from an enterprise background, and our company also works with large enterprise. We're in the AI ML space, primarily DevOps and infrastructure. And so in terms of, I actually had the opportunity to meet my co-founder, who's a roboticist in undergrad. This was about a decade ago. And in terms of my career overall, I actually started programming at a young age. So, but this was all back in the Middle East. So I was born and raised there. I only moved to the US about 3 years ago. And it was really just to pursue that American dream. But once we got into Y Combinator, after YC, we raised a round, and of course, saw the challenges. I mean, for us as a company, and I know this is, one of the main topics of the conversation today, which is how do you fundraise as a female founder. But there were times in the last 2 years of building this company where I thought that I should step down and have a male CEO take my place. And actually, because one of the things that happened over time was I realized that as a female founder, I would have to get the big name customers, have our product out in the market, have active users, and then I'd be able to raise a round. But then when we did raise our first round, it was pretty significant, and for a seed. So what I realized during this period is that I think that if more and more women over time are listening to some of the challenges that female founders face. And I think it's becoming kind of a deterrent for them to actually enter into the space, especially since what's happened recently. But what I've realized is that, yes, we have to work much harder than our male peers in some cases. But at the end of the day, if you build a product that is validated in the market, that you have enough customers, and you're actually able to show product market fit in some ways, then it becomes easier to raise a round. But in terms of my background, primarily was in the enterprise space.
Eileen, actually, that kind of fits in with what inspired you. I know that you talk a lot about education is a mission, but you also believe that it is a marketplace. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah. So my background was first teacher, high school English teacher for about 15 years in Chicago. Had a chance to start a school. It's #1 in Illinois today. And then wrote a book actually on close reading and argumentative writing, which sounds jargony, but it actually is kind of like the core focus of our new standards, which are focused on 21st century literacy. And as it was coming out, I was actually the director of curriculum and instruction for about 115 schools in Chicago, with 111,000 students and 10,000 teachers and principals, who I was supposed to train with my handouts and my book and my workshop about how to do this incredibly difficult thing. And then I thought about the 3.8 million teachers who were supposed to turn around and teach the 55 million students these new standards that would literally either give them access to our economy or deprive them of access to that economy. At the time, and this is about 7 years ago, there was tons of technology coming out for sure, thanks to some of the innovation that was happening. But what I saw was lots of teachers adopting freemium tools that were designed for teachers, often single pain point solutions. I also saw technology that was being sold to schools that really kind of subtracted the two key motivators for coming to school in the first place, which was the teacher and the other students, where kids are sitting in adaptive computer cubicles, kind of answering multiple choice questions. And I also saw a complete disconnect between technology and the people who actually buy things for schools and are charged with improving at a systems level. So there were no tools to help administrators achieve the shift in instruction that was required to give all of those students access to 21st century economies. And so I knew we had to have technology to improve learning. I knew we needed technology that made teachers' jobs easier, but I actually thought we needed technology that would improve the system at a very large scale, because there were millions of people and now billions of people who are trying to access these skills, and technology was the only way to scale it. And going back to the market versus mission is, 70% of the women, or the people in our profession of teaching are women. And for too long, we've kind of shifted the responsibility for providing women and their male counterparts with the tools to do the job they've been charged with. And I consider education a universal basic right, like anything else, like water, healthcare, even defense, and we're not funding it. We're counting on teachers to find tools. We're counting on philanthropists to provide tools. And so I am passionate that if we're going to provide the highest quality products at the lowest price, we need a competitive marketplace just like in any other industry. And so I'm passionate that for-profit will provide more access and more impact, oftentimes than non-for-profit. And so that's kind of a stance that I'm kind of proud to take as an advocate for the profession.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. I'm Sara Nadel. I'm the co-founder of StellarEmploy. We use innovative predictive analytics to help employers of high-volume jobs, so call centers, multi-unit restaurants, hospitality, quickly identify their best fit employees. And we do have a social impact component. We are very strong at identifying people who do not have the typical education or professional background for these jobs. These jobs don't really require a particular educational or professional background because they're trained on the job. And by placing people in jobs they wouldn't otherwise get, we're very proud to generate additional wages through better jobs and increased wages for the people that we place. I actually came to this, it's funny, Caroline, HR tech is also a very women-dominated sphere within tech, and certainly HR is a department that's typically run by women compared with other departments. I came to it from a very male-dominated sphere. So I was getting my PhD in behavioral science and applied statistics at Harvard, mostly in the economics department. The pleasures that women experience in higher ed, particularly in economics, have been written about extensively in the past 3 months. And I started thinking about really great ways to increase professional opportunities for low wealth populations and the challenges that they face even breaking into the labor market. And once I had broken it down and started thinking about individuals and started thinking about ways to place those people in jobs and ways that we could signal their ability to do jobs well, I suddenly found myself in the HR sphere. So I sort of jumped from one to another. I decided that I'd much rather be an entrepreneur than an academic, and here I am today.
Great, well, thank you. Hello, my name is Maia Sharpley, and I'm a partner with Learn. I just want to first start by thanking you for pulling together this panel, because I think it's so important that we actually have these conversations and that we open up the conversation publicly. So Learn Capital was founded 10 years ago. It is the first company, venture capital firm in the education with an exclusive focus on education technology, and also the first to go global. So we've been in this space for a while. As mentioned, I just recently joined, and I'm absolutely thrilled to join the team. My background and kind of what got me into education, I kind of fell into it, actually. I started out of business school like everyone else, doing strategy consulting, management consulting, working my way up the ranks. And I was actually focused in telco and media, and got into education because one of my mentors, who is a woman I had built a company for at Goldman Sachs, I was kind of sitting on her couch saying, what should I do? How does this work? And she said, well, let me introduce you to a couple of people if you want to like think about kind of getting off the road out of travel for a little bit. So met through her people who were working for Joel Klein. And he was pulling together his Children First team at New York City Department of Education. And so I joined that team. Thought I'd do it for a year, kind of give back to the community, and then hop back onto the consulting wheel. Well, I did it for a year, and 1 year turned into 2, and the next thing you know, I'm in 5 years, and we're taking on all these great fights, and we're winning some and losing some, but learning a lot and continuing to go on. And so when I decided I need to get out of the public sector and go back to the private sector, I looked around, and consulting seemed like the right thing, but I think the education bug had bit me at that point. And so I went on to Kaplan. And what I found is that, the intersection, I think, as you said, of thinking about education not only as a mission, but actually how do you produce results, right? We need to make sure that we have results. And I think Kaplan was great at thinking that way and building a business that's mission-oriented, but actually delivers results. And so I think it's a natural progression then to move on, because I love that idea of building businesses, to move on into the venture capital side to help others build businesses and to make sure that we're identifying those businesses that are really creating equity and access for all, that are able to scale and that are able to bring kind of equality both behind the business but also in front of the business to, you know, to the folks that we serve. And so I think it's really just interesting.
So, to pick up this theme of like mission versus marketplace, so mission is often identified with, you know, doing good and feeling good and, you know, nonprofits and by some extension into women's work. And so I would love to hear everyone talk about their experiences either as a venture capitalist or as a founder, sort of making your business case, having the passion for education, but believing in this as a business and being treated equally as such.
I think yesterday, Eileen and I were also talking about and you brought it up too, about this idea that, you know, we decided to do for-profit in this space, not just because of the marketplace, but because these real problems are actually a space that products that can solve them would be viable as something that can be competitive in a marketplace. And I think even early on when I was starting this, there was this sense that if I was going to do something social impact, because I'm a woman and a woman of color who's very, very much grounded in like a lens of equity and framing a lot of this work as a means to make sure that there's equity in education, that I should be a nonprofit. That's a nice thing, and so you should just go and you should fundraise from foundations. And I think that I really wanted to challenge that notion that because of that framework and because of that lens, that somehow it wouldn't be a real scalable business in a marketplace that was ripe for growth, right? So
I'm gonna join. So I lead a nonprofit. I'm gonna vouch for nonprofits here. I honestly think that really the reasons why take one or another legal structure don't mean that these are two different worlds. In the end, I think either under a nonprofit or under a for-profit, we need to build sustainable businesses that have impact and that can scale. And the fact that you are on the nonprofit space does not mean that you can do that. No? In our case, I started Laboratoria in Peru in 2014 with really a mission to transform the lives of underserved women and to change the tech sector. We were replying to a real market problem. You know, there's a need for talent and for diversity. But it would have been absolutely impossible to raise any sort of capital other than nonprofit capital back then. I mean, social impact was not even getting started yet. Sara actually also started in Peru, so she knows a little bit more about that. And I think that was our only way to start building a business there. And as we've grown, I think really the nonprofit structure has given us the space to make sure that we continue focusing in this underserved population that has a lot of challenges, of course. And I mean, start targeting someone differently would definitely make our work probably easier and probably profitable sooner. So it's helped a lot, and I think it's great capital that still needs to be out there. But overall, we are really striving to build a sustainable business. We've scaled. We're in 4 countries in the region. We're already having like a pretty solid revenue that I feel proud of. So yeah, I think it really depends on the circumstances. But in the end, I don't see it as different. You know, now there's all sorts of hybrid models. At some point, depending on our capital needs, we might end up opening up a for-profit structure next to the ones we have. So I do feel that there's like a stronger blur between these two worlds.
And I think, Carolan, what you mentioned about access, I think that is incredibly important, whether you're talking about the ed tech space or workforce tech. So what happened with at Tara AI was we initially built an algorithm. The algorithm would look at a programmer's existing code on GitHub and Stack Overflow, and then start to stack rank them based on like their past performance within these repositories. And so this algorithm was actually what we call Tara. But what we found was that recruiters were placing like a high premium on graduates from Ivy League universities rather than state colleges or community colleges. And we found that at the end of the day, you know, a programmer's ability could not be identified by any factors such as age, race, or pedigree. It's really about merit. So it was really this early algorithm that, that kind of catapulted us into what Tara is today. So what we're doing with large corporations as well as startups is through AI and ML, Tara is actually recommending how their software products should get built in an unbiased manner. And so it starts from, you know, what languages or what frameworks should be utilized for those software products, but then it also goes into which people should actually deploy the code and program on a day-to-day basis. So, so we've had, you know, the system recommends internal employees as well as contractors. And these, you know, contractors, in terms of our pool, we have about 50,000 developers on our platform. So, but what's really exciting is about 35% of these developers are women. And that's pretty significant because it's definitely a higher percentage in terms of what you see in the workplace. And that's really because these contractors can freelance and they can, you know, contribute and commit to projects in large enterprise that they may otherwise be overlooked for full-time positions. So we've seen with Access, what we've seen is, you know, we've had more veterans programmed through the platform in terms of just, you know, actually contributing code to important projects at large enterprise. We've had more women, and in a lot of cases, even product managers, female product managers that may have taken some time off to raise families, but still have that solid experience in terms of managing technical projects are also on the platform and are able to freelance and contribute. So I think the access piece is really important. And, you know, as what I'm really excited about is I'm noticing that more women that build companies are more cognizant of that idea of access. And I continuously see that, you know, as more and more women are coming into the technology landscape and building algorithms and building software programs, they're, you know, considering, you know, unbiased data sets. They're building algorithms that will be unbiased in nature. And I think that's what really excites me, because access is important, and we need to make sure that people that are from certain backgrounds, I mean, I'm an example of that, right? I'm Pakistani. I was born and raised abroad. I moved to the US with about $200 in my pocket, right, on a tourist visa. And I'm, you know, my co-founder and I, luckily, we received our green cards recently through the Extraordinary Ability Program. But I think access is really important, and I think that's, I'm excited that more of us are thinking about that as we build our companies.
Can I just, in keeping with that theme of access, I want to make sure that everyone understands that I'm not in any way villainizing philanthropy or non-for-profit as a kind of enemy of good in any way. I think what I want to do is sort of unvillainize for-profit in the world of education, because I think that one of the challenges with social impact more generally, but particularly education technology, is that there is a mentality that it is the work of missionaries. And nobody's questioning, for example, that, you know, a school building should be built by volunteers necessarily, or that computers should all be donated and we should count on that as the solution. But when it comes to the work of teachers and teacher resources, honestly, that is often the mentality. And if you followed the state walkouts with teachers in 4 states walking out and heard some of the commentary from legislators, one of whom said, well, the teachers can go on their husband's insurance. You know, I really feel that it's important to remember that, you know, to put like a piece of text by Gabriel Garcia Marquez into our platform, a short story is $10,000 per year to permission it. So particularly in literacy, where our content can't just be invented and owned wholly by us, that in order for us to provide that equitable access to the greatest works of literature and the most high quality text from the highest quality publishers, we actually have to pay for it. We also have to pay for engineers to make consumer grade technology instead of the poor technology that was designed in, you know, prior years. And guess what? Venture capital is really hard, despite like the greater amount of venture capital that's been poured into education of late. You know, compare the, and Jennifer and Maia, you probably have much more recent stats, but I know that between 2010 and 2016, about 2.3 billion went into education, and WeWork's last raise was 4.4 billion. So relative to other investments in other industries, there's still very, very, very little venture capital going in.
1.5 to 2%.
1.5 to 2%, and of that, when we also then say, okay, now there are women who receive venture backing, and we did close a Series B, and we're really proud of that because so few companies achieve that, but that's still, again, only 2% of the venture capital. Yeah. So if more entrepreneurs who really understand and are close to the problem are coming from that space and are solving the problem for that space that is really, our biggest user base is going to be women, there is something wrong with that. I think that, when we look at top leadership in education, 70% of the superintendents in the US are white men. So, there is inequity, and I cannot help but think that it doesn't have something to do with the idea that the work that we do as teachers is, again, sort of that women's work, and therefore the domain of charity, versus something that, frankly, I think if people could make a lot of money off of education, we'd have better products and we'd have more educated people in the world. And look at globally, the fastest growing and biggest kind of unicorns across the globe, guess what? Education companies, because consumers recognize that this is how their kids are going to have access to their futures. We, unfortunately, haven't taken that ownership as much here in the United States. It's not a federal right. It's not an amendment. We don't have access to public education by right. Our states choose to do it or not.
Jennifer, do you kind of want to weigh in on the venture capital angle to this?
I'm so glad, Eileen, that you mentioned that. I think it's mission-driven businesses. It's not just an education thing. Mission-driven businesses across outside of education in all different sectors are great businesses. One of my mentors, John Doerr, used to say, we back mission-driven founders, not mercenaries. And you look at the S1 filings of some of these companies that have gone public, they are driven by missions. Like, Mark Zuckerberg's, or probably not a good example right now, but the Google CEOs, and they're very driven by missions, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think what you touched on, though, is that sometimes women sort of get put into this category, though. Oh, you're building that cute little mission-driven business over here. And that's why it's so important for women when they're pitching to venture capital to really focus on the scalability and the vision and to be aggressive when they are pitching companies. So we get about 30, 40 companies inbound a week at Reach. And I can say that just sort of speaking broadly here in stereotypes, is that and there's a lot of research behind this, that the women tend to not talk more about like how they are protecting against losses, the downside of the business, versus like what is the big vision here, what is going to make this company grow really fast and highly scalable. So my advice would just be that to go into these pitch meetings knowing sometimes you just have one bite of the apple, and to really focus on the scalability and how you are going to make a lot of money. Like that matters, and showing that aggressive side of your business is really important.
How did it strike you when Ibis says that I was thinking of stepping down as CEO so that we had a more effective pitch?
I think it's super sad, and I understand though why you might have. Hopefully you don't feel that way anymore, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? It's a problem because it's kind of like you don't want these early stage founders that are just getting started out where, for me, I mean, it was really a data-driven decision, right? I mean, if you're going into meetings and you're seeing that there is a level of subconscious bias that is being displayed, there were times where I would, there were 3 VC meetings that I had after YC Demo Day, and in 2 of them, they initially assumed that Masood was male. I mean, and so the first thing that happened was when I stepped in, it was a shock, like it was a surprise. And so I was like, and then at that point I was like, okay, should we have our CTO, raise funding? I mean, he's our founder and CTO, and our founder and CTO say, he's sitting right there. He was like, no, you're going to do this, and you're going to continue doing this. You're going to continue and keep hustling, and we'll get there. And we did. And it's just at the end of the day, like for me, it was really just an optimizing decision where I was like, I want this company, whatever's best for the company, that's what should happen. And if the face of the company should be someone who's white male, especially considering the area that we were in, which was enterprise infrastructure, DevOps, and AI ML, I mean, there's also the fact that there were meetings early meetings where I would go in and they would assume I'm in fashion tech.
Yes.
Or food tech, or, I mean, it's, So there are traditional companies, and there is obviously a level of pattern matching as well that occurs. But what I'm excited about is the future of the investment landscape.
Yeah, I'll just put a plug in for so 75% of VC funds are all male. There's about 600 VC funds, and 75 are all male, not one woman investor. So there's a group that I'm a part of called allraise, allraise.org, and Forbes was so awesome to put this group on the cover of Forbes this month. And they have a group called Female Founder Office Hours, and you can have women that are mentoring and women VCs that are supporting this community and helping diversify the industry.
Do you think that there should be some sort of mandate from VC firms, like X percentage should go to women, X percent women of color, people of color, or do you think that's too hardcore and, you know?
Well, yes, it's a very good question. Maya, I'd be curious what you think, but we have bosses, which are our investors. We have to go fundraise too from all white male groups too. So we have the same experience. But you know, until that changes, I know that there's a bill in California that I just heard recently, like the California endowments are not putting a quota, but they're encouraging to diversify the funds. These are like funds that are investing CalSTRS and teacher retirement money. Until that changes, there's no forcing function to really move the needle, I'm afraid.
You know, I think the key thing here is that at the end of the day, those companies that have the best ideas, that are solving the right problems in the right ways with an agile team that can pivot and shift as they encounter difficulties are the ones that win. And I think the good news is that women and minorities who come up often have more challenges in front of them, right? And so they actually, without actually knowing it, are often better prepared without actually thinking about it, because you're coming up against challenges and you're having to pivot and shift and, you know, figure out your way around or figure out how to express yourself in the face of resistance. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to keep an eye out and to recognize that if someone isn't presenting in the same way that the man who just came in before, it doesn't mean that they don't have the right idea. It may be that you have to listen differently or ask questions to pull out that information. And that's incumbent upon all of us when someone comes in front of us. But we're really looking, I think, for the right ideas. And I love your idea, Jennifer, about mentors, right? So I think all of us on this stage can probably say there have been mentors that have helped us along the way, whether it's in big ways or little ways, right, as we go forward. And so building your mentor network, Jessie Woodley Wilson says, you know, you need your own personal board of directors, right? And so you need to think about how do you have that personal board of directors that you can go to and say, oh my goodness, I don't get it, or oh my goodness, can you help me, right? And you can actually be yourself. And so, you know, the organization you've built, and I think these are the key things that will help us to crack that ceiling further.
So the archetype of the successful entrepreneur is, you know, the lone wolf in the hoodie, right? And what allraise and what you're talking about with mentorship is talking about like networking and support groups, which is also a more traditionally female orientation to look for support groups. So I would like to ask anyone here on the panel to talk about your feeling of maybe loneliness without one, and you're haven't had one, or the benefits in real life of having a support group, and what's happened, how has it led to any sort of success, specifically again with this whole idea of fundraising?
One of the most fulfilling experiences I've had as the co-founder of StellarEmploy is that I run a breakfast for women CEOs and founders in HR tech. We're a very small group, deliberately so. We do not encompass all of the women who are founding HR tech companies in New York. And we started by getting together with other women, inviting women who were senior, typically in HR, to join us for breakfast, one woman per breakfast, and talk about her experiences and then answer questions that we had about selling into her organization, how she might think about a technology company that was young, often pre-seed. We found those to be really satisfying, and we learned a lot. But then at some point we kind of lost the external person, and we started just hanging out us and getting regular breakfasts, talking about the own challenges that we faced. Of the group, 60% have gotten married since we started, and so talking about how they're perceived with a huge diamond ring on their finger when they go into pitch, the comments that they got in that situation, and then also just the general experiences that you have running a company, running an HR company. And I think that being able to limit the group by the fact that we had a shared gender and thus slightly more shared experiences was really satisfying and a really, really nice experience.
You also spoke about actually trying to fundraise. You were pregnant at the time.
Yes.
What was that like?
Yeah. We were fundraising and eventually ended up joining Entrepreneurs Roundtable, Accelerator, ERA in New York, starting in January. I gave birth in December, so I was fundraising between 7 and 9 months pregnant. And what I told Carolan was actually, I was nervous about this. I expected to go into meetings and be written off entirely. And I was really pleasantly surprised. Most of the people I was pitching to were men. They often, congratulated me on my obvious pregnancy. A couple of them gave me some advice about their own infants. But no one seemed concerned about the company when they met my co-founders, when they were convinced that we had a really strong team, we had a really strong product. And it was a total reversal of what I had been told to expect. And I will say, even today, seeing those investors now post-baby, the number of investors who have really useful conversations about sleep training, for example, we suddenly have this whole new shared experience that we can talk about, and I've experienced it very positively.
That's unusual.
Yeah.
My friends that have been pregnant and have fundraised, have received all kinds of strange comments like, who's going to take care of your kids, and who, how are you going to do this, and it's good that things are changing. It sounds like.
Yeah, I will say New York has a reputation of being much more female founder friendly, and that could be one of the reasons.
Yeah.
Recently related. We have an investor from LinkedIn who's a man, but who is very much committed to creating parity in the tech world, and who took it upon himself, which I initially thought was a little bit weird, to convene all the women tech founders in Chicago for lunch. And I thought, like, wow, that's really awesome, really nice of you, but like, shouldn't we have done that ourselves, And he was like, well, but you guys won't do it. You're sitting there eating a sandwich at your computer, and you're not going to leave, and you're not going to go play golf, and you're not going to go get drinks. And I was like, wow, that's actually a really good point. And he's like, and we have all these networking experiences and these social experiences that you guys don't have. And I think that's one of the things that I try to create within our company. Like, a lot of people ask if we can have coffee, and I'm like, ugh. If you want to come to my house while I'm eating breakfast with my kids, and I have 4 of them, I will have coffee with you. Otherwise, come to our office on Friday night for happy hour, because that's where, like, kind of I try to build in that social aspect of networking, et cetera, for other tech companies, other people who are interested in what we do or whatever. But I think that challenge of creating some of the social networking outside of your workday is actually where, for like kind of mothers who want to have like that work-life balance. That for me is actually probably the most challenging part. It's not all of the other aspects. It's that other part that I know one of our investors said, if you want to be successful, you're going to have to network at least 2 nights a week. And I was like, oh, well, I'm like gone so much. Networking with my kids is kind of what I want to do with the nights I am home. So I think that finding some other ways to make that kind of social networking possible is really important.
So quick show of hands, who is a entrepreneur founder in this room? Looking for advice from these brilliant women here on stage. We have about 5 minutes left. Everybody, just sort of like, you are role models of success. I would like for each of you to come up with something for the audience to take away as far as, again, back to the topic of fundraising while female. What is the most important thing that they should keep in mind when they're going out trying to raise funds?
I'll say something that actually Jesse Woolley, who you brought up earlier, said last year at ASU GSV that has stuck with me and has grounded me a lot, which is that the reality is being a woman of color, trying to fundraise, trying to build a venture backable business, what have you, is going to be a lot of extra work. It's going to be a lot of extra emotional labor. It's going to be a lot of extra challenges, and just acknowledging that to be true and knowing that that's going to be the case and not faltering because of that, I think is something that it's important to acknowledge, because to pretend that it's just as easy, that all it takes is just building the product or just building the right, or bringing the right team together, is not true. It takes more than that. So yeah, just honoring that.
I guess my advice would be that you may not feel like you're naturally a good fundraiser. I felt like this when I started my fund, that you can become a great fundraiser. And you can practice at it and learn how to do it. It's a skill just like anything else that you can learn to get good at. And it's worth putting in the time to become a good storyteller, to get your data, understand there's so many resources online to become a really good fundraiser. So it's a growth mindset that it can be done.
I would piggyback on that. I remember having a breakfast in New York in December, excuse me, with a team, and they were going in front of, it was kind of their early stage of pitching, and they were very nervous. They were going in front of, one group after another of all men, and we sat down and we went through their deck and they pitched, and they had the slides in there and everything. The market size is $2 trillion and we can get 80% of it, and they went through their normal story with me. And what was missing from that was their voice, right? So they had gone through, and I ran an accelerator, so I know the pitch, and they had gone through everything that they were taught, but their voice was missing. And so, I kind of took the slides, I flipped them around, I cut half of them out, and I said, now try it. And here are the slides, you know the data, right? It's your company, you've built it, you're passionate about it. Tell the story from your voice, not from the voice of what the points that people want to hear or need to know, certainly, but from your perspective, and be natural. And I think you'll be much more powerful in that respect.
Yeah, I complement that. I think one of the most important things is to just be genuine and be who you are. And if you're doing something that you really love, even if it's hard to pitch, it just comes out. Every time I talk about my work, I cannot avoid it. I mean, I love it. I really, really like it. And I feel that we're building something that's so powerful, that's not only changing the lives of thousands of women, but transforming an entire sector that can become an example of diversity and inclusion for the world. And you need to remember that it's not only you it's not only you needing something from those that are on the other side, but I mean, they actually would be lucky to be able to join and be part of something like that. So if you have that mindset too, and remember that they also gain a lot of joining what we're doing, I think it helps to feel a bit more confident.
Yiba, last word.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's funny, but I feel like with a lot of these female fundraising panels, it's really about, a lot of the comments that are typically mentioned are around, have your metrics in place, ensure that, you have your customer stories and their references and all of that. But I honestly think it's also important to kind of, it's what I'm realizing is that when investors essentially, one of the things our investors say is that we are part of your team. And so you should utilize us and so some of the most valuable investors that we have today, I mean, they're like, a text away, not even an email away. So it's kind of like I can continually talk to them as we face challenges day to day. So one of the things I would recommend is actually to vet your investors before they come onto the table. And I feel like with a lot of female founders I speak to or I coach or mentor, they continuously tell me that, we're getting this check, we should just take it because these are our options. And I say, no, wait and hold out for better investors to come along. So, when we were building our first prototype of Tara, one of the first checks that we got was the investor was like, I'll put in $75,000, but I want 40% of your company. What? When I said no, and this was in the Middle East, and when I said no, this was like right before we got into YC, but when I said no, he told me I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life.
And you don't.
So, you don't. Yeah, so I think, just last words, I think, we should be vetting our investors as much as they vet us. And I think, and it's not even about the firm, it's about the partner that's going to continue to be on your board. And so that's one thing I'd recommend founders to be cognizant of.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you all for coming, appreciate it.